I am Solon, born in Athens during a time of political strife, economic hardship, and social division. My city was fragmented by tensions between the aristocracy and the common people, between the rich and the poor. The wealthy landowners, or eupatridae, held immense power over the lower classes, who were often reduced to debt slavery due to mounting obligations they could not repay. Athens was on the brink of civil war, and it was in this environment that I would rise to play my part in shaping the future of our city. My lineage traces back to Cadrus, the last of the legendary kings of Athens, though my family was not among the wealthiest. We were of noble birth, yet I grew up with a deep sense of responsibility towards all Athenians, regardless of class. I was born into a time of profound inequality, where many citizens struggled under the burden of debt, their lands mortgaged, and their very freedom at risk. It was clear to me from an early age that Athens needed reform, but it was not until much later that I would be given the opportunity to implement the changes I had in mind. In my youth, I was known more for my poetry than for politics. I traveled widely, absorbing the knowledge of the cities I visited, especially the wisdom of the lyric poets and the laws of the city-states of Asia Minor. My poems were often about justice and the common good, and though they were not overtly political, they conveyed my concern for the well-being of Athens. I first gained prominence when the island of Salamis became a point of contention between Athens and Megara. The Athenians, having failed to capture the island, had forbidden any further attempts to claim it. But I could not stand idly by while such an important island remained outside our control. I composed a poem that roused the people to action. Reciting it in the marketplace, I stirred up the Athenians' pride and sense of destiny. Spurred by my words, the people overruled the decree, and we successfully took Salamis from Megara. This success earned me the respect of my fellow Athenians, and I began to be seen as a potential leader. Yet, my political career truly began when the crisis of inequality in Athens reached a tipping point. The city was teetering on the edge of revolution. The poor, crushed by debt, were demanding land redistribution and the abolition of their debts. Meanwhile, the aristocrats feared that their wealth and privilege were in danger. Athens needed a mediator, someone who could bridge the gap between these two warring factions. To my surprise, both sides turned to me, hoping I would restore order. I was neither the richest nor the most powerful, but my reputation for fairness and my distaste for tyranny made me an ideal candidate. When I accepted the position of archon in 594 BCE, I knew that my first task was to address the crushing debt that weighed down the poor. The Sysaxia, or shaking off of burdens, was my solution. I enacted a law that canceled all outstanding debts, freeing those who had been enslaved because of their inability to pay. I also forbade the practice of securing loans on the debtor's person, thus ensuring that no Athenian citizen could ever again be forced into slavery over unpaid debts. The Sysaxia was a bold move, and it angered many among the aristocracy, who saw their wealth and security eroded by the reforms. But I knew it was necessary if we were to avoid the bloodshed of civil war. I did not confiscate the lands of the wealthy, as some of the poor had demanded. Instead, I sought a middle path, one that would restore balance without stripping the wealthy of all their power. It was a precarious balance, but it was one that I believed would ensure the long-term stability of Athens. Once the immediate crisis was addressed, I turned my attention to political reforms. Athens, at that time, was ruled by an oligarchy, with power concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families. The common people had little say in the running of the city, and this imbalance was a constant source of tension. My goal was to create a more inclusive system, one that allowed all citizens, regardless of wealth, to have a voice in governance. I divided the population into 4 classes based on their income. The Pentacosiomedimni, the wealthiest, were eligible for the highest offices. Below them were the Hippias, the cavalry class, the Zeugatai, or hoplite soldiers, and the Thetes, the poorest citizens. While the wealthiest still held the most prestigious positions, I granted the lower classes the right to participate in the ecclesia, the assembly of citizens, where they could vote on important matters. I also established the Heliaea, a popular court where citizens could appeal decisions made by the archons. This gave the people a direct say in the judicial process. Though these reforms did not establish full democracy, they laid the groundwork for the democratic system that would later flourish in Athens. I believed in gradual change, in giving people just enough power to feel invested in the system without destabilizing the city. It was a delicate balance, but it was one that I was determined to maintain. In addition to political reforms, I introduced several economic measures to strengthen Athens. I encouraged the cultivation of olives and the export of olive oil, a commodity for which Athens would become famous. To protect our agriculture, I forbade the export of any other crops, ensuring that the city's grain supply remained stable. I also standardized weights and measures, making trade within and beyond Athens more efficient and fair. Recognizing that not all Athenians could be sustained by agriculture, I promoted the growth of crafts and trades. I encouraged the immigration of skilled artisans from other cities, offering them citizenship in exchange for their expertise. This influx of talent not only diversified our economy, but also contributed to the cultural flourishing of Athens. Beyond my reforms, I also saw myself as a teacher, guiding Athens towards a more just and harmonious society. I believed that laws were not enough on their own to ensure the well-being of a city. The people must be virtuous, and virtue comes from education and moral guidance. My poetry, written both before and during my time in office, was my way of communicating these values. Through my verses, I spoke of moderation, justice, and the dangers of greed and excess. I warned against the hubris that so often leads men to ruin, and I urged my fellow Athenians to embrace the principles of balance and fairness. I also believe that laws should be flexible, adapting to the needs of the people as circumstances changed. That is why I refused to make any of my reforms permanent. After enacting my laws, I left Athens for 10 years, traveling abroad so that I would not be pressured to alter them. I trusted that the Athenians would grow into their new system, finding a way to make it work for the benefit of all. Looking back on my life, I know that I was far from perfect. Some have criticized me for not going far enough in redistributing wealth, while others have accused me of giving too much power to the common people. But I believe that I struck the right balance, steering Athens away from the extremes of tyranny and revolution. My reforms did not solve all of Athens' problems. The tensions between rich and poor, between oligarchy and democracy, would persist for centuries. But I like to think that I set Athens on a course towards greatness, providing the foundations upon which later leaders would build. The democracy that emerged in the years after my death was, in many ways, a fulfillment of the vision I had for my city. A place where all citizens, rich and poor, could share in the governance of their state. As I near the end of my life, I take comfort in knowing that Athens has become stronger, more just, and more prosperous because of the work I did. My hope is that future generations will continue to strive for balance, to resist the temptations of power and wealth, and to remember that the true strength of a city lies not in its rulers, but in the virtue and wisdom of its people. I am Solon, and I have done my best for Athens.